Hello! Today we will be exploring working in computer science with University of Virginia alumni. I'd like to welcome Jonathan Bao, software developer at Yodel. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi.
Welcome Brooks Childs, software engineer at Explore Learning.
Thank you for having me.
We have Jake Canali, engineer at Commonwealth Computer Research. Welcome, Jake.
Hey.
Did I pronounce that right at all?
You did.
Okay, good deal. We have Kevin Thompson, VP of Engineering at Uber.
Good morning, thanks for having me.
And we also have Peter Sahajian, software engineer at Symantec.
How you doing?
Doing good, and hopefully I got your last name right too. Perfect. All right, let's jump into it. Why did you choose a career in computer science? Let's start off with Peter.
So computer science, that was my major in my undergraduate at UVA, and obviously, my strengths were, or the school gave me a choice to kind of pursue more computer science research-based things or more applied things in software development. I think because a lot of my background at high school, which put me onto the field in general, which was a lot of problem solving and applied aspects of it, made me focus more on those during my undergraduate courses. And because of that, I took a lot, I focused a lot more on web applications and web development. And that was really where I found a lot more of the enjoyment in what I was doing and in my studies and all of the problem solving that was in that domain. And because of that, I focused a lot more on applying for jobs that were in the web development industry, and that's pretty much why I ended up at where I'm at now.
Wonderful. Kevin, why did you choose a job in computer science?
So I think I represent a slightly different age cohort than some of my colleagues here on the panel. When I was entering the field, it was much more difficult to understand what jobs were in industry. I originally thought I wanted to do academia, and I originally studied computer science with an idea of being an artificial intelligence machine learning researcher. I spent a lot of my 20s in an academic environment, first working directly at a university and then at a NASA research facility. And then over time, I realized that the part I liked more was actually building things for people. I built a piece of software as part of my research program that had actual customers who gave me feature requests and bug reports and things like that. And I found that actually more motivating than writing papers for conferences, and decided that was kind of a hint that I was probably in the wrong place. And I originally moved over to industry for that reason, and it was because I like building things. I like building interesting things for people and solving hard problems.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jonathan, why did you choose a career as a software developer?
I've always liked to code since high school. I actually got a major in systems engineering, and a lot of my colleagues, I think, go into consulting, where I think they're fighting with Word docs or PowerPoints or Excels all day, and just writing code doesn't even feel like work to me. Working on an assignment for school for hours on end, you're just solving problems. And like Kevin said, once you actually get into the job, you're actually creating something that real people will use. So there's really nothing better than trying to help someone else do what they need to do.
Wonderful. And Jake, why did you choose a position as an engineer?
So in high school, I also became interested in coding. I ended up having a really bad high school teacher, and I came into college declared as a drama major, and completely
it's like the
switched.
opposite.
I know. So I was really into theater in high school. I thought I would do the same in college, and I had an engineering roommate who had taken a class with Professor Sheriff in the computer science department. I really wasn't liking my major, and I didn't really know where I fit in, so I thought I would take this class on a whim, and I got to talk with Professor Sheriff more and more. He really piqued my interest in it, and I think one of the things that he taught me was computer science can show you the entry to almost any field. Anyone is going to need someone who can write code and develop software for them, so you could go anywhere after that. And I thought that was just one of the coolest parts about it. I also like building things and solving hard problems. I was always into Legos as a kid, and I think that software development is a little bit like putting the Lego blocks together. and seeing the final creation at the end is really cool.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Brooks, why did you choose a career in software development?
I'd always been interested in math and science, and I went to an engineering high school. So I came to UVA in the engineering program, but wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And after kind of floundering my way through some of the more intro courses, I had to take CS 101, kind of immediately fell in love with it. I taught myself HTML at some point in high school, and this just kind of seemed like an extension of that. As others have said, it was, you know, putting pieces together, solving puzzles, and I really enjoyed that. And I also really enjoyed, this is true for all of computer science, but more so for web development, which is what I do, the rapid prototyping, being able to save my document, refresh my browser, and see my immediate changes. That really appealed to me, just kind of that minuscule steps of progress towards the end goal and the constant updates and being able to, you know, just get feedback so quickly because you can have a viable product so fast.
Wonderful. So Brooks, we're going to start off with you real quick. What were your biggest challenges in your first year of work out of college?
I think it was, you know, making that adjustment from kind of doing coursework to doing work. What's expected of you, what your kind of schedule looks like, where your new help resources are and things like that. So I ended up working for a company called Explore Learning, as you said, which is a really small company. When I was brought on, I made it a team. So it went from a front-end team of one person, or a front-end person to a front-end team of 2 people. And so there wasn't a lot of infrastructure as to, you know, this is how we do things. So myself and the other person on the team got to make up a lot of that as we went along. So it was a lot of kind of reading both, you know, technical stuff like Stack Overflow, but also we spent some time researching, you know, how we should organize ourselves and kind of what kind of schedules we should get into. So it's just kind of making that adjustment to, you know, not having weekly assignments due, but having month-long projects or, you know, year-long projects, and kind of making the adjustments necessary to, you know, make progress and meet those deadlines.
Wonderful. Peter, how about you? What were your biggest challenges in your first year of work?
So my initial struggle, which is not an uncommon one, is actually being able to integrate with the existing, you know, architecture and technology stack that my company just had been working with. And you know, I'm fresh out of college, and I'm now working with a huge team, and they're not always small, concise teams. Sometimes they're big groups of people that kind of break themselves off, but it's still a lot of people you may be interacting with. So it was, I really did have my first year a tough time trying to break in and understand it, making my voice heard so that someone could spend 5 minutes to tell me what I need to know to go and do what I need to do. And because of that, it was a little bit tough to grasp and really feel like I was contributing. So initially it was grasping that and feeling like I could be a contributing member and get you know, yell a little bit so that someone could hear that I was here ready to help but didn't know how to help. So that was my toughest part.
Wonderful. Jake, what about you? What was your biggest challenge in your first year of work?
For me, it was the idea that, so in college, basically every homework assignment can be done in a couple of ways, but there's like a righter way and maybe a less right way. But there, let's say, like 5 ways to do something. And in the industry, it's not always like that. You're often making your own solutions that maybe have never been done before, or you're borrowing from solutions that you find online, or just other people that you talk with. Striking up a conversation leads you to some insight. There's this great image on the internet where assignments in college are represented by a Rubik's Cube that's perfectly solved. And then doing any real world development is represented by a Rubik's Cube that is painted to look like it's solved, but it's not really solved. And I think that's pretty accurate. It's taking a lot of different pieces and trying to solve the puzzle together. It's never perfect, but it's good enough to get you going. And I still struggle with that now. Searching for that perfect solution that might not exist but is good enough.
Wonderful. What about you, Kevin? What was your biggest challenge in your first year out of work out of college?
So not out of college, but I think more when I switched from academia to an industrial environment. I think a lot of it's the cadence. I remember, so it is a pace. I went immediately to a startup that had 4 engineers, and we were working a lot of hours and sort of classic Silicon Valley craziness. But I think the thing I remember was the adjustment of either in academia when you finish publishing a paper or in college when you finish a final exam, there's it's done. I remember my first major deadline for a customer at my company. I thought there was going to be this, it's done. But like the next morning, the customer immediately was giving bug reports, and there were immediately problems, and there was immediately move right on to the next thing. And there is a certain, I love this field. It's been great to me for a long, long time, but there's a certain unrelentingness to it. There's never that feeling of you're done with something, because the moment you launch something in an internet software company, there's problems in an hour. And as soon as you finish one amazing deadline, the next thing is coming, and that's what keeps it exciting. But I remember the adjustment from a college environment where when you finish final exams, man, there's 3 weeks where there's just nothing. That just never comes in industry.
Wonderful. Jonathan, what was your biggest challenge in your first year of work?
I think anytime you start at a new company in a software job, that you have to learn the code base. You're never going to start out with a blank screen, a blank project. You're going to have to be working with existing code, and any line that you write could have ramifications for other parts of the code that you're not really familiar with. So it's just catching up on all the code that's already there. And I think it's a little frustrating starting off because you want to sit down and code right away, but you don't really have the familiarity. So it's a little slow going at first, especially in your first job, but anytime you switch companies, I think.
Wonderful, thank you. So do you have any recommendations, or excuse me, I'm going to jump back here. Can you describe your typical day or week? We'll jump back in with you, Jonathan.
I work at an internet company, so we have weekly sprints. So at the beginning of the week, we'll get together and we'll pull down what we'll work on that week. And then we're coding it, we're writing all the test cases, doing code reviews. And then I guess we deploy it ourselves. And then on Friday, we'll do a demo to the whole company, showing what our team accomplished that week. And then next week, we start all over again. It's unrelenting, like Kevin said.
Wonderful. Kevin, do you want to jump into a typical day or week in your position?
Yeah, so at my sort of job, I haven't been an individual engineer for quite some time. I'm all about enabling, which means I'm doing what needs to be done most that week. So this particular week, it happens I'm focusing a lot on recruiting. I have a couple senior candidates that I'm really working on bringing into Uber. But in a typical week, I'm all about organizing. I have a fairly large team and trying to figure out the boundaries, trying to figure out where a new problem gets solved. Setting goals. Most companies out here use quarterly OKRs, objectives and key results. We happen to be in mid-March right now, so I'm focusing a lot on what's the Q2 goals, making sure that all the teams are fitting together, and giving kind of a framework for the entire team to think about their priorities for the company for the next quarter. But it really varies from week to week. 20 hours of every week is planned out, but the other 20 or 30 or 40 is what comes up that week. And sometimes it's a crisis in the field. Sometimes it's a personnel issue of some sort or another. Sometimes it is a new requirement coming from a coordinating team. A lot of my job is about coordination across a very large engineering team.
Wonderful, thank you. And what about you, Jake? What's your typical day or week?
On Monday, we ingest new data into the software that is a marketing analysis tool for a major consumer electronics firm. We also have our sprint review and then our sprint planning meetings on Monday. Tuesday, we have a meeting with the client, and we just talk about what was new for that week, any new features, any bugs that were fixed. Then we also get new bug reports and new feature asks. And then for the next rest of the week, and sometimes 2 weeks, we're working on just fixing the current bugs that are highest priority and implementing any new features, and then rinse and repeat.
Wonderful. Brooks, what about you? Typical day or week?
So we use a longer sprint. It's probably too long to really call it a sprint anymore, of a month-long cycle. So most of that time is spent working on new features as we've laid out at the beginning of the month or whenever the sprint has started. And then some of it is, of course, running around and putting out fires as serious bugs, show up. And then we are meeting twice a week. All the teams on the project are meeting and kind of having a quick 15-minute stand-up meeting just to keep everyone up to date on what's going on twice a week. And then specifically the front-end team is meeting once a week to go a bit more in depth into any issues we're having, and also just to kind of generally talk shop and discuss exciting things that we found on GitHub and that kind of stuff. And the rest of it is just, coding. I'd say at this point, I'm probably 60%, working on new code, new applications, and 40% supporting existing applications.
Wonderful. And Peter, what about you? A typical day or week?
So these guys have really talked a lot about their Scrum and sprint cycles. Mine kind of sits at the happy medium between maybe a week and a month, as was previously mentioned. But it's kind of the same type of meetings. We have every day of the sprint a 15-minute stand-up with our team just to go over everything we've done in the past day and what we plan to do, and if there's anything blocking us. Depending on the week, if it's a starting week, we may have no meetings planned, really. You just work on whatever comes up, or you work on whatever's next on your list of tasks that are determined by somebody. But on other weeks, we may have planning where we're looking at all of the tasks, reprioritizing them, discussing potential implementations, trying to scope them a little bit. Those meetings happen, again, weekly, or bi-weekly, I should say. And then as already mentioned, there are a couple meetings where we're supposed to demonstrate what we've done. This kind of, if you're looking at this practice of Agile Scrum, your work week, whatever you call it, your sprint actually is really well defined. It's not what are you doing differently than everybody else? It's really, how are you doing the same types of meetings? And really it's demonstrating what you've done, making sure you can iterate quickly in case something goes wrong. And that's what we have bi-weekly. And then typically, so I like to be involved in some kind of feedback groups, and they call them guilds. Where I work, it's just simply focused groups that are not really inside the same process. They're kind of outside the process, but they're meant to improve it. So I will typically have a meeting maybe once a week for those. And then the rest of it, like they've mentioned, is pretty much handling any customer-facing issues that come up or working on whatever tasks I've assigned to myself.
Wonderful. So Kevin, do you have any recommendations for how someone could prepare for and succeed for getting a job in your industry?
So I thought about this a little bit. What I would focus on a lot earlier in your career is diversity of skills, trying not to get labeled as just a whatever, one particular part. And by that I mean, make sure you understand basic web skills, a couple different frameworks for how we build web apps, build an Android app, build an iOS app, but also don't just focus on that area. Make sure you understand what distributed engineering at scale means, how locking works all the way down to the bottom, big data, take a couple stats classes. It's the thing that companies that I've been working at the last 10 years for are people who understand the fundamentals, but also can go all up and down the stack. And that's a difficult thing to achieve, but just don't over specialize early on would be my main thought.
Wonderful. Jake, any ideas on how someone could prepare for and succeed in getting a job in your field?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the same things that Kevin said. And having that experience on the resume is super important. A lot of the resumes that come through that I read that focus a lot on organizations that you were involved with in college, and less so on the skills or projects or experiences that you've had in software engineering and computer science. If you contribute to an open source project, if you have something to show for your interest and talent and passion, that goes a lot further than what your GPA was or how many awards you got in college.
Wonderful. Jonathan, what about you?
I was just going to answer the part about the getting a job. I think there are two people you need to convince to be able to get a job. The first is using your resume to get past the gatekeepers. And then the second step is to convince the people, the team members that you're interviewing with. I was going to say for the resume part, that GPA is kind of important because there's so many engineers out there. Everyone wants smart engineers. So unfortunately, GPA is important. And what I would tell to people who might be looking to raise their GPA, obviously you can work harder and go to office hours, but I don't know if this is good advice, but if you're taking a lot of really hard classes, your GPA is probably going to suffer. If you're doing a lot of things if you're doing a lot of other activities, your GPA might suffer also. So there are things you can do if your GPA is a little lower to try to focus on improving it before you apply to jobs. And for the interview part, there are only so many interview questions that people ask you. You can interview at Facebook, Google, or you can interview at Northrop Grumman or a bank like I did. And you can really prepare for the interview questions that you get at a tech job. The only ones the ones I would give advice about are the interview questions such as, tell me about a time when you ran into a problem and you had to, solve it with someone else's help, or something like, tell me about a time. And I would prepare for those questions by thinking of, before the interview, 2 or 3 projects that you've worked on, so that when they ask you those questions about a time when this happened, you only have to think about those 2 or 3 projects and not necessarily your entire college career. Hopefully you'll be able to find an instance within those 2 or 3 projects that then you can go in depth and talk about in terms of preparing for the interview itself.
That's such a great idea. All right, so Brooks, any recommendations for how someone could prepare for and succeed in getting a job in your industry?
Kind of go along with what Kevin said about diversifying. You don't want to be, a JavaScript guy or someone that only does C++. And with an eye towards that, I would encourage people to look both, if they can, get some experience working on legacy software, as well as keeping an eye towards what is on the cutting edge, or not even so much the cutting edge, but what's on the, what's new and hot in the industry. What are people actually using? In a given day, I'm working in both Cold Fusion, which is, while not a dead language, is probably on life support, as well as I'll turn around and in the next minute I'll be writing, some newfangled JavaScript to run on a Node server. So if you can kind of have some experience with what's come before, or at least show that you're able to jump in and learn these older systems, as well as have an idea, at least, of what people are doing that's hot right now, I think it's really going to benefit you.
Wonderful. And Peter, any recommendations for how someone could prepare for and succeed in getting a job in your industry?
So it's really hard following up everybody what you said already.
Sorry.
So what I'm going to do instead is I'll kind of tell my own personal experience and something I learned from it a long time ago. By the way, Brooks, I don't know if you saw, but Stack Overflow just published their new what are developers using kind of list for this year. So it has a ton of info. Everybody should go look at it. It's got all the info on what everybody uses now in the technology industry. It's really fascinating. You'll see the trends and everything.
All Cold Fusion.
Maybe.
No.
So one thing I want to touch on was something Jonathan said, actually, and he was discussing making sure you have an answer to, well, what's one tough time, or what's a time you worked on something, a tough time when you're working on it, or what's a success you've had at a previous project or job. I was asked that at an interview for a place I really, really wanted to work. I simply had marked down what project I was going to talk about, but that is not enough, because I started getting asked questions, follow-up questions that I hadn't really thought through. Things about, well, why did you choose to do this? Why did you do this? Let's explore this for a second. A lot of tech interviews, they're not there to scare you. They're there to kind of pick your brain and see if you have some really cool insights or something that might be cool to discuss. I mean, I know when I interview people, I'm be very pleased if at the end of the conversation I have an idea of how well they can perform in our technology stack, but also I was laughing with them for a couple things. Maybe they told me something. Anyway, so this was something where I was just floundering. I was just looking around like, well, why did I do that? I didn't have answers to a lot of these questions. And that was a really big clue as to the fact that it's not enough necessarily to just put on paper, what am I going to do during an interview? You kind of have to know it. You kind of have to be able to go off script. And that was an experience I'll never forget. I'll learn from that. So just, as Jonathan said, I really agree, but also make sure what you earmark for those discussions in case they ask you, you have ways to discuss it. You have more to say than just, I worked on a geo-based app to play a game of Risk at my university. That doesn't help when they want to ask you something else.
You're like, just because I like dice. I mean, that's all it is.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, wonderful. So Peter, we'll start with you because I felt bad that we gave you at the very end last time. So what do you like most about working in your industry or field?
So there are a lot of things. We kind of already touched on why I wanted to go into this industry, which was that I found the problem solving to be something I had been doing for years, and that I kept enjoying the practical application of it. I think I'll change my answer, or I'll kind of say what a more recent discovery of when this question was asked to me. I like the fact that because I'm working in a web application or web industry, I have an excuse to go look at all the new cool things, the bleeding edge technologies that people are coming up with. Even if I know I'm not going to use them at my job, in fact, I probably won't use 90 or even mention 95% of what I find, I kind of have an excuse. Working with legacy is a big issue, as someone already, I think Brooks already mentioned. It's kind of an issue where you don't get to really have the freedom you want, because if you change something, you might break something. But what I really like about what I get to do, and this is a technology, this is web, everybody uses the web nowadays, everybody. It's the fact that I get to look and learn I have an excuse to learn and see all the new things that will eventually be seen by a lot of people. And that just increases my skill set, and then I can use it in fun things that I want to do myself. So technology is great because it's used in more and more places. And now I have an excuse to go find all the cool new things and study them if I want.
Awesome. All right, what about you, Kevin? What do you like most about working as in computer science?
I touched on this a little bit early. It's affecting users. Then that can vary a lot. My first job was affecting a very small number of banks and very highly leveraged people within those banks. I've been lucky enough since then to get it to the point where I'm affecting 1 billion people a day with YouTube, and some number of users a day on Uber. A lot of it, they're hard problems. They're just fundamentally hard problems. They're intellectually challenging, and they're different than anything else. I was in a meeting yesterday where we're trying to figure out how we balance the needs of riders and drivers at Uber, and that's just a deeply interesting and intellectually challenging problem. But the other thing I think I haven't touched on enough is you're working with wicked smart people, by and large. And I think one of the things that I'd really emphasize to people is that I don't actually know what the undergraduate program is at the UVA is like these days, but programming by yourself is sort of the exception, not the rule. Most of what you're doing is working with other people, trying to figure out how your APIs interact with their APIs, how your part fits in with the whole other part, making sure you're not duplicating things, making sure that there's pieces of infrastructure that are built for other people. In my experience, that's a little bit of a big company perspective, but that's a lot of what you're going to do. But by and large, I find people in software to be interesting, fun, and very, very smart people. And that's been one of the real pleasures to me.
Wonderful. What about you, Jonathan?
I was going to say the same thing, that obviously I like working with code and working with creating things that other people use, but the best thing is working with the people at these companies. Everyone, and it's not just that they're smart, it's that they have this, I find that no matter where I worked, it's the same type of person where it's not competitive, everyone's willing to help each other out. We're all just, I don't know, working with code, writing stuff, like it's fun. There's no, like I said, competition is the big thing, whereas some other jobs where people aren't willing to work together. And that idea that you could just sit in a closet somewhere, code by yourself, is not how it works in the real world. You're gonna have to work with other people, and if you don't enjoy working with other people, it might not be the best job for you. So everyone that I've worked with has been amazing at both communicating with each other and just being fun to work around.
Wonderful. What about you, Jake? What do you like most about working in computer science?
I really like the ability to help out people. I get way more bug reports than I do any positive feedback, but those one-line emails where it's like, you took what took me 10 hours to do in 1 week and simplified it to one button that I have to press. That's just really cool. The other thing too is definitely the collaboration with everyone in the office. I think it's amazing how you can just be talking about something over lunch, and then maybe an hour later someone will be like, hey, I took your idea and I cranked something out and that helped me so much. And then you can iterate off of that, build something on top of that. It's so cool, and is way better than working alone.
Wonderful. And Brooks, what do you like most about working in computer science?
I like that to some extent. You are your own boss. Yeah, when it comes, like when you get small enough, you get to be making decisions. As others have said, you can liken computer science a bit to building with Legos, and that's true. The fun part being you're not given the instruction booklet. You've got all these bits and pieces that you then get to choose how you sew them together to have the desired output. There are kind of established ways to do things. There's design patterns, and Stack Overflow is always there if you, are struggling with something. But at the end, the code you submit, that's your code. You got to design it. It's got your stamp on it, even if no one else would recognize it.
Wonderful. So let's go through, and any final advice for UVA students interested in working as a computer scientist. Let's start off with Peter.
Sure. So there's been a lot of really good stuff said, and it's very dense. We've had, however long we've been discussing all these great questions. I thought of this. This was the question I kind of spent the most time thinking about, because it's obviously very open-ended and really it's supposed to be taken by a lot of people, and so hopefully it helps give them some confidence in where they're going. But what I thought of when I first started thinking of what to say, there was a group of students that came to our office. They came from a program that puts them in professional industry workplaces and has them ask questions to a panel that I was fortunate to be on. And a lot of them didn't come from strong STEM backgrounds. Now, maybe a lot of the target audience of this comes from the engineering school, which is a strong STEM background. But even then, you'll ask any engineering student who might say, look, even if I'm in the engineering school, I still feel like I don't have the chops. I don't know all these things. They're mentioning all these things. I have no idea what cold fusion is. Am I gonna fail at this? But a lot of them were asking questions. How do I compete with other people who I know have strong STEM backgrounds? And my answer was, doesn't matter if you know some technology or other technology. What's going to help you almost as much, if not more, are having good ideas to bring to whatever team you're working with. There's no shortage of good ideas. There's no barrier to good ideas. So I felt like the thing I told them the most was, you have to be vocal. If you want to succeed in your first year or any year after that, be able to communicate with your team, ask questions, but come up with ideas. Because at the very least, someone will tell you we have a solution for that. And at the very most, you might be a junior developer working on a new feature or new aspect that puts a lot of eyes on you and a lot of visibility. And it all comes from talking and trying to suggest good ideas in the absence of any technical contributions, which is what I had for my first year. I was no shortage of ideas, suggesting ideas, and now I'm happy to say that I can be a point of contact for a lot of things. So really focus on your ability to put the technical thing on one side, learn it, try to understand it, all the great advice we've had already, but don't skimp on trying to be someone who discusses general ideas of how to do something better, because it's really helpful to every company.
Wonderful. What about you, Kevin? Any final advice for UVA students interested in working in this as a computer scientist?
So not to be difficult, but I think it's actually working as a software engineer more than a computer scientist. I think of a computer scientist. No. I think of a computer scientist as someone who's more in a research or academic environment. I think most of what we're talking about is working as a software engineer in industry. I think a lot of what Peter said is right, that you can succeed without a STEM background, and I think that's really good advice. Not to be argumentative, but I think the other thing I would say, which is somewhat out of sync, but if you do have a background, you've got a bachelor's degree in computer science, is that the fundamentals really matter if you're trying to interview at a place like Google or an Uber or a Facebook. Those algorithms and data structures classes that you probably didn't understand why you were taking them, and you really wanted to go hack Cold Fusion, those kind of questions really come up a lot because they do matter a lot. Anytime you're dealing with hundreds of millions of this or billions of that or trillions of the other, really understanding that those fundamentals matters. But the other thing I touch on, which I think Peter did talk a lot about, is teamwork. And I talk a little bit about this, about your software engineering classes, but brilliant jerks don't get very far in this industry. No one wants to work with them. You're not the smartest person in the room almost ever, especially if you go to a large company. There's almost always someone smarter than you. But the people who have all the soft skills really, really do matter a great deal. Communication, being able to write a succinct email that actually gets your point across, being able to write a design doc well, being able to present your ideas. Those things really end up making an enormous difference. And I mean, it's kind of typical, like everything I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. But I mean, there is some of that is, I've seen a lot of people at Google and elsewhere who had the most amazing coding skills in the world, but their careers didn't get far because they didn't understand all the soft skills part of really succeeding in industry. And if you think you're going to just, everybody's going to, beat down your door because you write good code, but you can't present it, then you should rethink that.
Very good point. What about you, Jonathan? Any final advice for UVA students interested in working as a software engineer or software developer?
I think just knowing that as a software developer, every week you're going to be learning something new, that you're never going to sit down to a task and know exactly what to write, where to write it. You're going to have to figure stuff out. You're going to have multiple roadblocks every day almost. And it gets a little tiring, but if you think about the alternative, there are some jobs. I used to work at a bank, so I would write software for the traders. And at 9:30 every day, when the market's open, they press a certain set of buttons that I made for them. And they do the exact same thing every single day. And for us, it's a creative job. We're making new stuff where you don't know what you're going to be doing that day. And I think if you do get to the point in your job where you know everything there is to know about your code base and how to do everything, you probably need to switch jobs, because if you're not learning, then it's not fun.
Yeah. Can you imagine if you switch that button to another area on the website, like mayhem, just ultimate mayhem?
Can't learn. I mean, we're expected to learn every single day, and other jobs, I mean, I've never had a different job, but just from what I saw, there's some other jobs where that's not really the case.
Mm-hmm. Very true. What about you, Jake? Any final advice for UVA students interested in working as a computer engineer or software developer?
Yeah, for students, I would definitely say find a personal project, whether that's a project that exists, that's an open source project, or just something that you saw a need for and you want to solve with code. That looks great on a resume, and it's something that you can talk about with passion in an interview. To prepare for an interview, like Kevin said, the algorithms classes are going to come in super handy for the interviews and all the fundamentals that you get taught at UVA. There's a great book called Cracking the Coding Interview.
Nice.
I highly recommend it. It's exactly what helped me prepare for all the technical interviews that I went for. The third thing I'd say is get very good at documentation. I was horrible about it in college, and I think it's one of the most important skills that often doesn't get, it's not that highly emphasized in college, I would say. And being able to write in a way that other people are going to understand and being able to communicate effectively is so important when you have someone new coming on and trying to get spun up on a project, or you have someone leaving who has all this institutional knowledge and they need to put it down so that someone else can come in. So those three things I think are super important.
Wonderful. And I love the idea that Jonathan gave earlier about having very tangible examples. And I think Peter emphasized on that of like being able to work through. I think all those points are really good. And you didn't happen to write that book, did you, Jake? Because that would be hilarious if he's like, I'm endorsing my own book.
I actually did. I get a little bit of the sales on Amazon. No, it was by Gail Lockman McDowell. I think she's up to the 7th edition. She used to work at Google, Apple, and a couple of other big tech firms.
I actually just saw her speak last week by complete coincidence, and she's actually amazing if you ever have the opportunity to see her speak.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, Brooks, we're going to finish on you. Any final advice for UVA students interested in working as a software engineer or developer?
After you have, the basics down, you understand what conditionals, loops are, and some more advanced basics like APIs and things like that. What matters less so is what you've done and kind of what you know, and more so your willingness, your ability, and your desire to learn and innovate. When we're interviewing people, we typically don't care, kind of what languages and things that they have experience with, what frameworks they've worked with. We're more interested in how long it took them to get up and running the last time they had to learn a new language or a new framework or adjust to a new environment. That adaptability and that desire to learn is the most important thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, to joining us today. All of our guests are mentors in Virginia Alumni Mentoring. University of Virginia students can log on to alumnimentoring.virginia.edu now and connect with other alumni for additional insights about the process of starting a career in their specific field. Thank you for joining us today. Make sure to check out more career and industry insights on career.virginia.edu. Thank you, and see you next time.